Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we are going to be putting Turbo Lost Box in the spotlight for the World Championships 2023 in Yokohama. This has been one of the long-standing archetypes that's always been around that top tier and continues to be a big threat in the metagame. Let's have a look at the general strategy, and that is that we want to ramp our Lost Zone to some key breakpoints here using the crucial supporter of Chorus's experiment, as well as a multitude of Comfey, using their flower selectings and using a combination of switch carts and escape ropes to get additional flower selectings in, allows us to get to 4 very quickly for that Lost Provisions early aggressive attack from Cramorant. Sometimes we can go as early as 7 on turn 1 in the Lost Zone if we've gone second, which then unlocks Mirage Gate, and that's a big combination of this deck. We call this archetype more often than not Turbo Lost Box, because with the combination of a number of Comfeys, Chorus, and Lost Vacuum getting rid of one of your own stadiums or tool cards, you can actually get to 7 on the first turn of the game, trying to ramp into a turn 1 Radiant Greninja Moonlight Shuriken attack for 2 90 damage spreads onto players' boards who don't have Manaphy developed, or against multi-prize threats, we develop the Dragonite V and dish out the 250 damage in the opening stages, which is able to knock out every evolving V Pokemon for 2 prize cards and begin initiating that prize race. So that's really something that we are looking for very often with the archetype. And then not so much on turn 1, but early on in the game we want to get towards 10 in the Lost Zone as well, because Lost Mine is also a crucial attack in the deck. It's just very efficient, can target many, once again, lower hit points, single prize mons, and we can constantly find ourselves having an easy prize map because of this Lost Mine damage sprinkle. Onto a skeleton list then for a turbo based Lost Box, and this is going to be the 4 Comfey, like I mentioned, with 2 Sableye as one of the key attackers in the deck. You play quite a low count of all of your Pokemon, as you can see. From then on it's just one-ofs, but we are playing 3 copies of Super Rod as well as a Clara in the deck list, so we do have multiple ways of recovering these Pokemon and recycling them. Remember, of course, that we are playing those Nest Balls and Mirage Gates, so sometimes you can Rod, then go Nest Ball, Gate, turn attach, and suddenly you're back in with the Dragonite, back in with the Greninja, or sometimes it's as simple as getting back that Cram and swinging once again with Spit Innocently. So we get to squeeze a lot of space out of the deck list and have a multitude of attackers available just because we are playing these Rods and Claras. Of course, Super Rod also has the upside, as mentioned, as helping out with those Mirage Gates, so that we are able to use concealed cards with Greninja in the opening stages just to cycle and see more cards through our deck, because we are combo based, knowing that we can put them back into the deck and pull them straight back out with the Mirage Gate. That's kind of the combo that we have going here. A ton of space dedicated to Ball Search and Switch cards, as mentioned, with that flower selecting being so integral. And Forest Seal Stone is an all-star in the deck. It is the only V-Star power we currently have in the list, and it means that we can cherry pick a certain piece of the puzzle. And whilst doing so, it's also then a target for your Lost Vacuum to force 2 more cards into your Lost Zone as well. So that's an additional fantastic card, just because it's a tool in general in the deck. We're quite streamlined with our supporters, but this can actually be the finished article sometimes, with just 1 boss, 1 Clara, 4 Chorus. Sometimes there will be lists that don't play any more than this, but we can be a little bit more experimental with our counts and increase them based on what sort of stadiums and such we want to play in the deck, which will come clear very soon. First, let's take a look at the matchup spread though, and it's looking pretty appealing for Lost Zone. You can see why this is such a high tier contender in the game. Many players put it right on up there with Gardevoir as one of the strongest decks. And part of the reason is your matchup is very good into what is seen as the other best deck in the game, Gardevoir itself. You are above a 60% win rate against Gardy, which is just exceptional. You come out the gate swinging with Cram, you set that tempo, and seeing as though Gardevoir players are constantly damaging their own Pokemon, you can really capitalize on that with your Sableye sprinkles as well. Yes, Gardevoir has Cress they can use. Yes, they have Zacian that they can try and penny up at times, but you're well aware of their tricks, and as long as you are placing your counters effectively, you are normally going to have a decent time here. We also are able to be pretty strong into Miraidon, much stronger into the Fluffy variant than the Regieleki variant, just a small note there, but both are very favourable. Then we have the United Wings, which is trying to simply dodge and weave the Lost Zone players because it really doesn't have much of a hope in that matchup. We just have too many ways of taking multiple prizes in a single prize mirror match, which is just very solid for us. Also seems that Chien-Pao Baxcalibur is pretty reasonable reasonable for us, even though there are potential Cologne and Lost City Manaphy plays available to that deck. In general, we still have very efficient ways through their Pokemon and are a little bit more consistent and can prey on slower starts. Mew is also pretty reasonable. You're typically teching in one way or another in that matchup. You're either going to be playing Drapion or Kyogre, and these Pokemon really help your prize trade, knowing that you can take a huge chunk of prizes in one go whilst being sort of efficient throughout the remainder of the game. And it also seems like the gate builds of Lost Box have a small edge against the Charizard variants of Lost Zone as well. Typically, the Charizard builds don't have as much draw in the opening stages without Greninja, and at the same time, they are constantly having to find Manaphy, whereas in that mirror match, you don't have to get your own Manaphy out as soon as you start seeing Charizard pieces in their deck list, so it also saves you some headache and some potential high rolls from the opponent you don't have to quite worry so much about. And also, with the nature of a turbo-based build, you get to 10 so much more often as well, so much quicker, so you're the one lost mining first, and that often dictates the winner overall. Plenty of even matchups in there as well. The Arctina and the Lost Tina both seem pretty even, as does the Lost Gudra. I actually expected this to be less favourable, but it seems pretty even in the matchup. And the Ting Lu on deck. It's pretty sad to say that Ting Lu also doesn't even have a positive time into Lost Zone players. You'd think it would be very good that they can shut down so many elements of this archetype, but it really seems like you still have an okay time there. Your only three true unfavourables would be Arcdura Umbreon, which is just a very tanky archetype that can also Lost Zone some key pieces for you. As soon as you start losing your Dragonite and your Raikou, you run out of high damage output threats, and it's not very easy for you to close out that game very often. The Rapid Strike toolbox as well has obvious means of trying to prey on your lower hit point Pokemon, where they will try and use Yoga Loop on your Manaphy and then take multi-prize turns with Urshifu, and because they have some tanky VMAXs, sometimes they're even tanking and using Cheryl there. They have plenty of means of making life difficult for you, and also it looks like the Lugia archetype is also a natural foil to these Lost Box players, continues to be a threat just because of their high hit points. They have Radiant Serena that can sometimes offset some Lost Mine math and basically never gives up easy prize cards, which most other archetypes, there's things that you can Lost Mine like quite freely throughout the game, or at least set up for multi-prizes, but it's just a little bit more tricky against the Lugia players by the looks of things. Let's talk through some tech options then, and one thing that you'll notice about the Skeleton 60 was that we didn't really land on any Stadium card, and that's because it's mostly just a hot debate. Sometimes you will see not many more supporters make it into that deck list, but then you'll see like 2 or 3 copies of Pokestop sort of add to your counts, and then you would turn your ratios more in favour of even more item cards coming into the deck list to sort of round out your 60. However, there will also be some builds that then go towards Artisan just for extra basic Pokemon search, which obviously the entire deck has a ton of non-rulebox basic Pokemon. It would only really be Greninja and your V Pokemon that you couldn't tutor out, but everything else you can grab quite freely. And there's of course Beach Court, which was used in the previous format, just to give yourself some easier pivoting options, and that's always a consideration card for you. If you do want to go heavier on supporters or just have a bit more variety in the deck list, we could consider Roxanne, definitely a solid card in mirror match situations, as well as just being some surprising hand disruption, because Roxanne is one of these cards that doesn't always find its way into Lost Zone builds, so sometimes you can catch your opponent unaware that you play that hand disruption in a game 1 scenario, and you can really catch your opponent off guard, and suddenly they have set themselves up for a certain turn follow-up, and you can Roxanne them out of it, and suddenly you really don't get hand disrupted back on your own end in many occasions, and that's when you're really going to take control of the game. Raihan can also be pretty solid. You have some 3 energy attacks, you have some 2 energy attacks in the deck list, so having Raihan to cherry pick these pieces can definitely be solid, and I think if you are going to look towards Sky Seal Stone, Raihan becomes more of a must-have card because it enables you to tutor out the Sky Seal Stone as well. Not so much the case when you are just playing forests, but if you are wanting to go down that direction, the Raihan becomes much stronger. The highest placing NAIC build of Turbo Lost Box, which did make top 8, was playing Ultra Ball and Luminion, just giving yourself a guaranteed search. A couple additional outs to try and grab Colress is obviously very solid, and because we already play Water Energy in the deck, you actually can Aqua Turn away this liability at some point in the game, so you're not worried about having this 2-prizer around on the board. You can force your way back into a single prize map, so you don't really feel the downsides of Luminion as much as possibly some other archetypes would. I was just touching on Sky Seal alongside that Raihan sort of mini package, but this is something that is available to the archetype, giving you that uptrade potential. We have started to see more and more V-Star and V-Maxes creep their way back into the metagame. I still expect Turbo Lost Box and Gardevoir to be the 2 most popular archetypes, and Sky Seal doesn't really chip in there, but against essentially every other archetype in the game, Sky Seal gives you a real extra dimension where you can be more aggressive. It certainly makes your Mew matchup easier if you are playing that Drapion, and if you want to have a different dimension against Arceus players, we have seen this in the past, that Galarian Zapdos and sometimes even Luminous Energy finding its way into the deck list, so you can have a one-hit KO option against Arc, which sometimes just isn't really the case with Lost Box at the moment. You have to go aggressive with Dragonite and then still finish them off with Lost Mines, and you can fall prey to Volos and Sherons and Collapse Stadiums and random tech cards like that. So having the Zapdos could be, again, a different, more aggressive dimension to have in the deck list, sneaking back in. And then there's the other direction, which is adding in Recycler and Kyogre with that Aqua Storm. Still one of the most powerful attacks in the game if you are able to set up your deck correctly and cycle low enough through your deck. Typically in these builds you will certainly see Pokestop, because half of your emphasis is just filtering cards that you don't need. So that's really the end game solution here, where you will Recycler and sometimes even Rod or double Recycler energy back into the deck, so that then you can turn attach, gate, and the remainder of your deck is just energy cards, so you get the maximum value Aqua Storm for some multi-prize plays. Let's have a look first at a pretty simplistic turbo build. This really has one goal in mind, and that is to have a fairly consistent 7 in the zone on turn 1 going second. And I still think it's okay to go first with this deck list, certainly, because just getting a couple selectings is still completely fine. It gets you really nicely in range for a turn 2 swing. Often, as you can see, Pokestops are in high counts here, and we are playing some Trekking Shoes as well, just to increase our overall counts of item cards so that we can cherry pick these from the Pokestop and make sure that we are cycling through the deck as aggressively as possible. You'll see it's only on 8 energy right now, and that really is on the low side. So if you do want to add in a third copy of either Psychic or Lightning, these are okay as well. But I just wanted to show off what is pretty much the most aggressive, most likelihood of hitting a 7 in the zone turn 1 based build, and that's really what we're coming out with and sometimes seeing in the format. Let's have a look at a sort of more balanced approach, still going quite heavy on those Pokestops, but does now include one copy of Ultra Ball and Luminion in favor of some of those shoes and a few other cards. And we're also adding in an additional supporter in Roxanne. So our ratios are slightly less skewed, and although we do play those Pokestops in a high count, we don't necessarily need to be slamming that stop every single turn. We'll use it if we see it in the opening stages just to give ourselves a dig towards VIP pass, or if we're missing a certain combo piece, we're happy to slam the Pokestop. But unlike with the full turbo build or sometimes with Kyogre builds, you're not going to be slamming that stop quite as consistently throughout the game. And you'll notice I am adding in this build, a 9th energy card. I'm going for a Lightning. I'm really debating between Lightning and Psychic, to be honest with you. There's huge upsides with Psychic because Sableye just is your end game in so many situations. But I also like the immediacy of having a third copy of Lightning energy, because the just ability to gate early for that Dragon Gale or for that Rondo is so big. And we've seen that Lugia is not one of your better matchups. So just having that constant access to Lightning energy seems important to me, just to make sure that you're constantly recuperating your Raikou and making sure it's a valid threat throughout the game, so that you can still race quite effectively. We also have a Kyogre Combo based build, and again, Pokestop is your best friend here. You can see that we're going even higher on item cards. You're even seeing the Echoing Horn come in here just to help with your prize mapping. You of course don't need Drapion in this list because you have the Kyogre, which can help out taking a 4 prize turn against Mew players. So typically you'll just look to find another easy 2 prizes, either with a combination of Sableyes, Crams, Greninja as well, just on another Genesect. That's oftentimes where you're going to see your prizes come from. And of course, because we have Kyogre, we need to go high on the Recycler count, as well as going up to 11 basic energy in the deck. That's really the change in mentality with this list. Less Forest Seal Stones, less Vacuums, so very much less likely to hit that turn 1 7 in the zone, but you have that late game comeback springboard potential to claw you out of all sorts of situations. And I think this one is also the build, actually just worth mentioning, that has the best time into the Arcdura Umbreon and the Lugia builds, the 2 unfavorables. I think Kyogre solves a lot of those issues because it's just has that higher damage output threshold, and those are 2 archetypes that typically aren't known for playing Manaphy, so you have that big catch-up that we don't really see so much of with a pure turbo build that can sometimes fizzle against these high hit point decks. There's also that Zapdos Sky Seal stone. We're trying to go for a Thanos approach here with having multiple stones at our fingertips, and you'll also notice we're playing 1 fighting energy but also 1 copy of Luminous, because there are 2 copies of Raihan in the list. You can cherry pick the Luminous energy for the appropriate attacker, be it your Raikou, be it your Zapdos, or even just helping out with Dragonite. It just seems to be very versatile. It can find its way even onto Sableyes and such. So yeah, this is a really interesting sort of mix and match approach where we're having the secondary supporter being Raihan, obviously with such a wide variety of these energies now, and because we have a single copy of Sky Seal and a single copy of Forest Seal, we are no longer playing the Pokestops because it's too big of a risk to slam and then whiff on one of those sorts of cards, because the Sky Seal sometimes is going to be a big part of how you try and navigate your prize map, losing that to a random Pokestop is just too painful. So instead we're having the Artisan Beach Court split here so that we are just being a little bit more safe and secure throughout our opening turns and still just making sure that we have an extra search option as well as the Beach Court for an extra pivot option. Never a bad thing to have in the list. So my closing thoughts then on Lost Box. In general, the deck is definitely walking on that tightrope of resource management. It can sometimes get thrown off by hand disruption here and there, especially because you're the one trying to be the aggressor. You're trying to initiate that prize race either with Dragonite or with Greninja or with Cramorant. One of those things is going to kick off the game for you, and you're going to be on that roller coaster and hoping that you can hang on in there from hand disruption, because you're oftentimes having to burst your next attacker onto the board at any given time, and sometimes that requires very delicate resource management from your lost zoning, keeping track of your energy for your gates and such, knowing when to proactively super rod and these sorts of things. It's a constant maintenance that you're trying to give yourself those extra percentage points turn by turn, so it's quite a mentally taxing and challenging deck, especially in longer tournaments. So you definitely have to be adept with Lost Box if you want to take it to the World Championships, because it also goes into our next point, is that you're playing a deck with a lot of actions, a lot of shuffling, and it's really difficult to avoid tying, and this is something you really want to dodge at Worlds if possible, because ties are losses in day one. You have to think about it that way, so you really want to avoid that. So being well versed in Lost Zone is the best way for you to play faster and play better. So it really pigeonholes you into, if you're good with Lost Box is a great pick for the tournament. If you're not very experienced with Lost Box, you have to stay clear, because all you'll be doing is making your own chances of doing well with the deck much, much lower. You cannot jump ship onto Lost Box. You have to be pretty well dedicated with the archetype to have a good chance at the World Championships, I would say. However, if you are someone who's been playing Lost Box for a good amount of time, I think you're playing a really flexible deck that has answers to the majority of matchups, especially based on what build you want to pick. I think your matchup spread does slightly change based on if you are wanting to play multiple stones, if you're wanting to play Kyogre, which I touched on, or if you just want to play some more traditional turbo builds. Your matchup spreads will slightly adapt from what I talked about earlier on from the Trainer Hill data, but I think overall you have a good variety of attacking threats that you can always find solutions to whatever your opponent's playing, which I think is also really, really appealing, especially against Gardevoir. You're just naturally good going into Guardy, one of the best Guardy matchups of any deck in format right now, and that alone is a selling point that is worth noting. And then finally, sometimes you just immediately win if you do hit your 7 threshold on that turn 1, if the opponent hasn't developed Manaphy, or if the opponent only got 1 V down, if it's a Lugia or an Arceus or something like that, and you're able to blow it up with a Dragonite, you just win a game immediately. If you're taking that 5-minute turn but instantly win from it, suddenly you're one of the fastest decks in the game, and suddenly you're going into that game too after a very short amount of time. So that could be a big reason to go for a turbo style approach and really lean into that turbo approach, because sometimes you just really punish slower starts better than any other deck in the format. Let me know your thoughts down below about Turbo Lost Zone Box for the World Championships. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.